Hello, friends. I'm Reverend Joe Morrow, Associate Pastor at Fourth Presbyterian Church of Chicago, and welcome back to the Salt and Light podcast. This is a unique space for conversation with our congregation's mission and community partners across the city, the state, the country, and the globe who are out there being salt and light to a world that needs it. We talk with people whose wisdom and compassion offer a light that can lift the shadows and make what is invisible seen. And with people whose values, like salt, preserve all that's good, loving, and just in our world. Today, I want to introduce Camesha Jones, who is founder and executive director of Sista Afya Community Care. Sista Afya is an amazing organization building sustainable mental wellness communities through providing affordable and culturally centered, we're going to talk about that more later, community care and education. Camesha formed Sista Afya in response to mental health inequity impacting the lives of Black women here in Chicago. And as a leader in the mental health space, she's been featured in Chicago Tribune, PBS NewsHour, Crane's Business, TEDx, and CBS Chicago. We are honored to have you here, Camesha. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you here and to really be in partnership with you over this past year and into this new year of 2026 when we are recording. First, I want to start out by learning a little bit more about you, Camesha, and what led you to form Sista Afya, what led you into the mental health space as a leader. Where were you born and raised? Who are the significant people or places in your own background that have kind of led you to where you are today?
I grew up, I'm an East Coast girl. I grew up in Maryland. I have two siblings, a brother and a sister, and a mother and a father who have been very instrumental to who I am and why I do what I do. But one of the things that I don't talk about as much, and I think it would be great to talk about in this podcast, is my roots in church. So I grew up in the AME church. My home church was Union Bethel AME Church in Brandywine, Maryland.
Oh, yes.
So a lot of the values that I have were because of growing up in that church. So I learned service. I was on the usher board. I learned creativity and expression through being in the dance ministry. And I did a lot of community service and outreach while I was there. And it was the norm throughout my family. I come from a family of helping professionals. My mom is in human resources. My aunt was a counselor, and even my dad, who is a mechanic, have all had this gift of helping others. And I think that growing up in the church helped to instill those values that have been evident in the work that I do today. And then the last part I'll talk about is sisterhood. So Miss Kim and Miss Karen, who were over the dance ministry that I was in from 5 years old all the way until like 21.
Oh, wow.
They really emphasized being your sister's keeper. So all of the girls who we all grew up together look after each other. Even to this day, we show up for each other, even though I'm in Chicago and they're in Maryland. We still are very connected to each other, and we were taught to care for fellow women in our church, but amongst each other. So, yeah, that's like some of the early values of, and I've actually never talked about it before.
That is super interesting, especially when you talk about sisterhood. One of, I think, the central stories of the Bible, particularly as you look in, really in Genesis, you see two siblings, two brothers at the very beginning in conflict. And Cain says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" A question that could be asked of anybody. Am I my sister's keeper? And What's interesting is by the time you get to the end of Genesis, when Joseph comes along and is kind of estranged from his brothers, and his brothers come to Egypt seeking help, he could turn the other way and say, I'm not going to help you. But he embraces them and actually says, I am your keepers. I will look after you. And so it's a case of siblings that actually come together at the end. So I think it's a very interesting sequence or thread that's run through Scripture, and I can see it applying to your life and your sisterhood. That there are these bonds between people, and not just siblings, but sisterhood meant in a broader sense. That there are these bonds that we have, and instead of just letting them go away, you've managed to preserve those bonds over these years. Is that in some ways the origin of the name Sista Afya? I'm very curious about that too.
So I wouldn't say it's connected to the origin of the name. When I was coming up with a name, one, I wanted it to be unique, that no one else would have it. And there were a couple of important elements of the name. One, the word sister, which is used in the African American community. It's a word of respect. It's a word of love. It's a word of connection. And Afya, wanting to connect to the wider African diaspora. Afya is a Swahili word and an Arabic word that means wellness. Yes. It also translates to being free of psychological and physical illness. And community care is, it really focuses on the community caring for one another so that people don't have to navigate their journey, their wellness journey alone. And one of the things that I've seen, and it's more articles are coming out about the health implications of loneliness.
Yes.
And how we're more connected but more lonely than we've ever been before. So with all those things together, the Sista, the Afya, the community care really embody the vision that I have for women and girls to be connected, to be cared for, to be loved, to be respected as they're navigating their wellness journey and their life's journey. So yeah, that is how the name came about. So it was just a combination of a couple of values and the vision that I have for the work that I do.
That's a beautiful vision, and also it's just such a organic image of people in community helping each other, building each other up, and it ties in so well with, I think, what we aspire to do as faith communities of all kinds. And so hearing and seeing what you're doing and the images and the words that you're using to describe that work, I think help and inspire us in faith communities to probe deeply and to better understand what are things like sisterhood and kinship and community, these words that we sometimes use but don't often ponder the meaning of. So thank you for that. So you had this upbringing in the church, very wholesome, very nurturing. What leads you to Chicago and founding this organization focused on mental health? What did that journey look like? Was that unexpected or kind of a natural trajectory for you?
So one pit stop before getting to Chicago. So I attended Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia. And Spelman is a college that is an all-women's college and predominantly Black women's college. So even to build upon the sisterhood, being at an all-women's college and a predominantly Black women's college, sisterhood was talked about so much. And Spelman's model is a choice to change the world. So when you're at Spelman, you are encouraged to use your education to change the world for the better. And when I was at Spelman, my last year, I met Dr. Lonnie Jones. She's a social worker and she's a professor. And she had a residency at Spelman. And she was the first Black woman that I met who had done research around Black women's mental health, and who was dedicated her profession to providing culturally responsive care. And so meeting her and getting to know her, it was even before I started having challenges with my own mental health that kind of led to wanting to create a solution later on. So Spelman is very instrumental to also my journey. And when I got accepted for social work school at the University of Chicago, that is how I ended up in Chicago. So it's a little Atlanta pit stop, then getting to Chicago. And when I got to Chicago, I experienced a mental health crisis and I was hospitalized. And after I got out of the hospital, first I was in denial about my mental health. I'm like, how can somebody like me, who maybe on paper has it all together, is dealing with falling apart mentally? So when I got out of being hospitalized and I had done weeks of intensive outpatient treatment, which is pretty much after you leave a hospitalization, you're in group therapy, you're in intensive therapy for weeks to make sure that you're stabilized to be able to manage your mental health while also living life.
Right.
So after I got out of the hospital, I finished intensive outpatient treatment, and the University of Chicago allowed me to continue my studies there on a part-time basis so that I could manage all these different transitions. I began to think about, like, there are probably so many other young Black women like me who are in their 20s who are trying to figure it out and dealing with mental health concerns. So I began to really marinate on that while I was getting my master's in social work. When the last year, 2015, I had the idea of Sista Afya. And after I graduated, I did some business courses and, got more experience in the field. And then I launched the private practice that I used to have in 2017, and then launched the nonprofit in 2020.
Wow.
So it was my journey has been part personal, but the other part of just being a social worker and seeing the disparities, seeing how on the Southside of Chicago, there are very few mental health clinics, and particularly mental health clinics that are designed with Black women in mind. And so seeing a professional need, a community need, but also going through challenges with my own mental health and knowing how hard it is to recover, especially when you don't have all the resources that you need.
Yeah, what a powerful story and journey, and thank you for sharing it. What struck me about your own story is that even in the midst of your own personal crisis, you were thinking, well, who else out there might be experiencing what I'm experiencing? And allowing yourself the opportunity, perhaps not feeling, up to it or maybe your full self to yet pour into somebody else and to say, well, if I went through it and I came through it, maybe somebody else out there can too, and to try to build up the resources that will allow more women, more Black women in particular, here in Chicagoland to overcome and to feel as though they can persevere and live full lives. So such a powerful, powerful story. I'm wondering, what does community care in the way that you have developed it now at the nonprofit level look like? What are some facets of it? If I were to recommend Sista Afya to a friend or a family member, what might they experience through your services and through your programs?
Community care is holistic for Sista Afya community care. Holistic in the sense that we want Black women to know that we can support them through not just a vulnerable time, but to also provide the resources and the ongoing connection as they're maneuvering through life. So we do everything from individual therapy, which is typically seen as the face of mental health.
Yeah.
But our organization also provides case management to women who have income barriers or are struggling with basic stability. It looks like our peer support program, Healed Together, where women with lived experience help other women who are navigating mental health challenges for the first time. And even our professional development program, Developing Mental Wellness Warriors, which trains advocates and mental health professionals to enhance their practice but be advocates in the field. So with Sista Afya Community Care, women, I don't want to say we're necessarily a one-stop shop, but we're a place where women, especially those who experience multiple barriers to care, are able to gain the stability and the support that can help to change their mental health outcomes for the long term. One of the things that I shared in a previous interview was that I am curious to see if 10 years down the line, the women that engaged with our services, how did their life outcomes improve? Or what were their life outcomes as a result of receiving mental health care and treatment? I will also say community care is also how we collaborate with other people. So we've collaborated with so many Black women mental health professionals across Chicago. We've supported each other's events, helped each other's client community. So the community care aspect is also not just what we provide, but how we partner with women all across the city and really all across the country with this shared vision of mental well-being for Black women and Black girls.
Wow. So it sounds like you've done so much to really capitalize and build on the gifts that you offer as an organization so that the community as a whole or writ large really has more resources available for women who want it, need it, and can increase not only their health, but the health of the community. Your question about those long range or those long-term outcomes also strikes me as a great doctoral thesis for somebody out there. That would be some great research and probably necessary research to do to help us understand how we can effectively change those outcomes in the long haul. Speaking of which, I mean, what are some of the things that you might hope for as a clinician and as a leader for the women that you serve? Like what does long-term good health and mental health on a holistic level, what does that look like? Or what are some of the things that you might hear from your clients and participants about what a good life or the good life feels like for them, a year out or 2 years out?
Well, I will start with knowing that a better life is possible. I think Black women and girls are often told that we have to self-sacrifice, that we accept the scraps of life. And for Black women and girls to know that the possibilities are endless and that you deserve the best, regardless of your background, regardless of what you've been through, that you can have the quality of life that you may even just dream of or not believe is possible. So that is the first thing. The other part of what I hope to see from the women and girls who engage with our services is to know that they are a priority. As I just mentioned, historically, this goes all the way, back to slavery, and then even how we're socialized as women, is that we're not a priority. Everybody else is a priority except us. So I want to see women prioritize their well-being and how their life fulfillment can increase because of it, and how prioritizing their well-being can also have a positive impact on their relationships with other people, whether it's their children, whether it's their partner or spouse, or their friends. Like, it has a ripple effect.
Right.
Not that they have to be responsible for it, but that they can show up as their best selves. Other hopes that I have is that our mental health care system becomes more inclusive of women who are on the margins. Mental health is still a very classist industry. So people...
Say more about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the classism comes with people who are maybe middle income, who may be considered middle class or higher, are able to access mental health care so much easier, whether it's through their insurance or being able to pay out of pocket. They have the most choice and the most opportunity to receive the treatment that they need and to receive quality treatment. But when we think about women who live in mental health deserts, if we consider women who've had income barriers, if we consider women who've had negative experiences with the mental health care system, those are the women that I believe need to be centered, because their obstacles to engage in mental health treatment, to have continuity of treatment, is much more at risk. Yeah. So I would love to see the mental health care industry to not just cater to the people with private insurance, but the people who are uninsured, the people who are Medicaid or Medicare recipients, the people who live in communities, not just urban, but rural, who cannot access care as easily. And so that is something that I'm passionate about. And I think the state of Illinois has made some great strides to emphasize the power of community mental health, particularly because community health organizations like Sista Afya are the lifeline, are the support for those group of people who are on the margins.
Right. They're recognizing the service that you provide in the larger landscape of need, and that you're filling gaps in our public health system, if you will.
Yes. Yep. So I guess that's a systemic analysis.
Yeah.
And then I kind of talked about the family and community connection, and then individually. So those are the things that I hope to see. And I'm very proud of women in our community. I mean, to think that 10 years ago, Black women talking about rest and self-care was not normalized. To now, where Black women and girls are thinking about that. They're trying to incorporate that. So while there are mental health disparities and there's a way to go, there has been so much progress since I've been in the field with being able to overcome stigma, to talk openly, to find providers, and to normalize a different way of living and being that our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents could not have imagined to be possible or even an option.
Right, right. Oh, that's such a good point, too, that we're seeing generational progress. And often, I think, within Black circles more generally, we tend to think, well, if my parents or grandparents were able to somehow make it without this, or somehow were able to survive, then, do I really need it? Or can I indulge this in my own setting? And often it's not a choice. We need to guard our health in a holistic way. And sometimes I think that involves us looking at the past and saying, it's a benefit to us today to be able to do some of the things that our forebears wish they could do. and why don't we take advantage of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's value in resilience, but there are also negative impacts of resilience. So I think for Black people, resilience has been what we've needed to survive. However, that resilience shouldn't be an and or that for me to be resilient means that I don't engage in mental health care. But how can I build resilience? How can I have post-traumatic growth? How can I know that this is a situation that I'm facing but still get help? So I feel like it's an and situation. And I also think in the context of church, having spiritual wellness while also focusing on mental wellness and how all of that works together instead of it's church or faith or Jesus or therapy.
Right.
And I believe that God created the field of psychology, created therapists and helping professionals because he knew that there was going to be suffering. He knew that there were going to be people who needed a particular type of healing to be able to navigate life. And so sometimes I think it's getting much better, but we don't think about, we know that there's going to be suffering. We know we're in a fallen world and God has created people and professions to be able to be a part of the healing that we need as we navigate life.
Yes. Thank you for pointing that out. And even in our own congregation here at Fourth Church, we had a center, the Repogel Center for Health and Wellness, that focused on mental health and well-being and counseling for many decades. And it was, I think, a testament to what you said, which is that God does want us to use these tools for our own health and well-being, that they're gifts if we have the wisdom to really use them. And if we don't, I think even remembering the stories of our forebears and ancestors, there's generational trauma that goes from generation to generation if we don't attend to some of these things. It's even in our literature. I think of Toni Morrison's Beloved as a story of that intergenerational trauma working its way down if we don't attend to it. So there's opportunity and need to use God's gifts in those ways.
Yes.
Is there a person or a story that that has helped you in your learning as you've grown into this role and into this work? Are there persons that have helped you to understand new insights or dimensions of this work?
That's a great question. There are definitely multiple influences and people that I watch or listen to that help me to grow and think about this work differently. In terms of social work, there are two social workers. You may know of one of them that really inspire me. So one is Winnie Mandela. A lot of people don't know that she was a social worker. And Dorothy Height, she was a social worker as well. And what I both admire about these women, and it's a lens into how I do my work, as they were in circumstances where they had to make a way. And through their work in the community, through coalition building, through looking to solve problems, but to create a way when people told you that it wasn't possible, or to be innovative in how to serve Black women and their families in the larger community. So I really get a lot of inspiration from them. I was actually in Springfield, and it was Advocacy Day for social workers, and this was back when I was getting my master's in social work. And I walked into a bookstore. We just had a break, and there was this book on Winnie Mandela. And I didn't know her story. And it was so interesting that on Social Work Advocacy Day, I walk into this bookstore in Springfield and I pick up a book about her. I had no idea about who she was, her story, because we often hear about Nelson Mandela.
Exactly.
And I read her book and I was like, wow, this amazing woman who survived apartheid, who found ways to enhance the quality of life of people and communities across South Africa. Like, this is incredible. And when it came to Sista Afya, there were no other mental health clinics designed for Black women in Chicago. There were, to my knowledge. And it was in kind of the similar spirit of both Winnie Mandela and Dorothy Height created, be a part of the solution. So those are two women who I really admire and I draw from, like, as a social worker. I also read quite a bit. I read a mix of like business books, books on faith and spirituality. And then I also read books focused on mental health. So that's kind of like, in rom-coms. I also read romantic
Need
comedies.
some levity, right? Yeah. In the midst of all of that.
But through the different books that I read, it helps me to gain different perspectives that help me to do my work better from all those different lenses.
Conversation partners, if you will.
Yes, exactly. So that is something that I draw from. And also just the women every day that we come into contact with, we are actively learning from them about what they need. And sometimes when we think about helping professionals, it's like, oh, we're swooping in. But what I've loved about Sista Afya is we're always asking for feedback, and they have the solutions. They have the ideas about how to do this work better, how to be more impactful, what could help them in their healing journey. And just listening to them has been tremendous, in enhancing what we do. So that partnership with community, whether explicit or informal, is helping me to be abreast of and know what's going on. So for example, I'll just share this quickly. During the pandemic, we noticed that more and more women, adult women, said they had no friends or had a very limited support system. And the impact of COVID is that it made us a little bit more comfortable with solitude or a little bit more comfortable with being alone. And so that had a tremendous impact on their social wellness and how they showed up in relationships with others. So having the peer support program Heal Together, where a woman can schedule an appointment, she can have 5 free sessions where she can talk to somebody else to build that social connection and someone who can help them to solve different challenges that they're going through and to provide that emotional support, I believe was in some ways direct response to what our client community was telling us.
Wow.
So that's just like an example of the power of like noticing and listening and creating an option or a potential solution to make their mental well-being better.
Yeah, and to figure out how to help people live in situations of both solitude and community in very volatile times that we live in. So just a very good observation that you all were able to make, and then to pivot and shift so that you could create these new opportunities for the women that you're working with. That's fantastic work. One thing I'm wondering about as we close is what advice or guidance might you have for those of us who walk beside Black women in their care and in being in community with them? What advice or guidance might you give us to support them? I think of my own family. I'm raising 2 Black girls, and what is it that I should be doing for their mental health and well-being as they grow up?
Mm-hmm. Well, one, I would say listen to them. The most
people aren't seeing my reaction.
Right. So what I mean by
Yes,
listen to them is that, and we started seeing Black girls last year for Thrive in Therapy for Teens. And we asked girls, how can we support you? What do you need? They said, we just want somebody to listen to us, to not judge us, to not fix us, but the space for our parents, for our caregivers to listen to us. And listening doesn't mean you're just like doing what they're asking, but to hear them out, to get a glimpse of their everyday experiences. And when parents, and all of us, when we practice the skill of active listening and compassionate listening, we have greater insight to how we can show up for them. And I don't think for girls particularly, and women, that we really truly listen actively and compassionately to talk about life and what we're going through. I'll give an example that's a little, it is troubling. So this past year, over 600,000 Black women were laid off, lost their jobs, or have been out of the workforce since January of 2025.
Wow.
And online, in my circles, I know women who are directly impacted by that. And online, there were people who almost victim blamed Black women for losing their jobs en masse, saying things like they weren't competitive, they weren't competent, they weren't highly skilled, and that is why they were experiencing this. But listening, if that many women have lost their jobs in that short a time frame, there is something systemic happening. That doesn't happen by accident. Black women are often the head of households or breadwinners in their families. So when a Black woman loses her job, it has a ripple effect on the stability and the well-being of their families and our larger community. And so listening to Black women during, this past year would have looked like, how can we show up for them to be mentally well and physically well in the face of these obstacles? But how can we look further into why this is happening?
Yes.
So that's just an example of like how Black women are dismissed. Our pain or suffering is normalized, and there can be a lack of compassion for our full humanity, in the way that other people experience challenges or hardships, or to see, or to just stop normalizing the suffering and pain that we go through, and to support us to not have to experience that.
Yes.
Like, I think it's hard for people in the United States to imagine Black people without suffering. Like, that has been a part of the narrative of the Black experience.
The face of the Black experience.
The face of the Black. And it doesn't mean not acknowledging what our ancestors went through, but it does mean that what would it look like to create a world where this pain and this suffering was not enduring for so long, or even at all, that can, that can be prevented. Like I said, we all are going to experience some suffering throughout life, but the suffering that Black people and Black women have experienced was out of their control, but it is in the control of other people's hands.
Right. There isn't an advocacy piece to this. There is work that we can do as a society to be able to have each person in our society, Black women in particular, to be able to thrive, to flourish, to have joy, to even out many of the bumps in life's road, it doesn't have to be this way. That's such a great reminder that there is capacity within us to change circumstances if we're doing, from what I'm hearing from you, the listening well to figure out how we come alongside.
Yes, and with listening, action. Like you can listen and partner and take action. Because, I mean, how many times do people share what they're going through? People listen, but they don't do anything after.
Yeah.
They'll be like, okay, at least I listened. But I would want to challenge anybody who's listening to this podcast is to listen and take action, especially right now. We cannot sit on the sidelines for the stressors and the obstacles that are actively coming our way every day. And if we don't take action, we'll be here over and over again.
Yep. You're reminding me of the famous words in monasticism, which is ora et labora, pray and work. You can pray about things, but you also need to labor and work to make change happen. So, Camesha, this has been such a wonderful conversation. You've given me lots of things to think about and practices to engage in as I'm supporting congregants and neighbors and friends and family. So you've given us as a community so much wisdom today, and we're grateful for the partnership with Sista Afya. We look forward to ways that individuals in our community can come alongside and support your work. And before we go, I know you've mentioned you're always reading. Is there a book or an article that you would recommend us to check out that's been inspiring you lately?
A book? So I will say a podcast.
Yes.
That I've recently listened to. Reverend Dr. Nichelle Guidry Stewart. She is the Dean of Sisters Chapel at Spelman. She's a Clark Atlanta alumni. She went to Yale for Divinity School. And she just came out with a podcast called A Wide Open Space. And the podcast focuses on spiritual wellness and personal development. And I've really been enjoying it. It's on Apple Podcasts and I believe Spotify. But for your audience, I think it would tie together a lot of what we talked about today. And Dr. Nichelle Guidry Stewart, she is, I believe, a womanist theologian. Very powerful woman. She used to be in Chicago. Now she is in Atlanta. But I have truly been enjoying that podcast because I think it brings together a lot of like my interests and my focus areas, because I do think that spiritual wellness is extremely important as we integrate it with our mental wellness. And so to have someone who is, tackling both in some ways is definitely really refreshing.
Wonderful. Thank you for the recommendation. We'll be sure to get that out to podcast listeners. And thank you for the ways that you have talked about the integration of faith and health and mental wellness today and the work that you all are doing at Sista Afya. Friends, I hope you were inspired by today's conversation. Maybe you'll look for ways to volunteer with Sista Afya or support them or be prepared to listen to and support the women in your life and all of those who are in your life as well. If there's something in particular that inspired you today or something you'd like us to pursue in future podcasts, please reach out to me at saltandlight@forkchurch.org. Until next time, thank you, Camesha. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye now.